Another thing we noticed in these paragraphs was the students' use of transitional phrases and words. He says at one point, Grendel is further solidified. Another point, the epic also makes a biblical reference. And at the end he says, finally the poem confirms. We talk a lot in teaching writing in the lower grades and middle grades about transitioning from paragraph to paragraph to paragraph. First, second, third, another point, consequently. But here, it's within the paragraph. And I think that's a higher level of sophistication. Was there any specific instruction that you provided to get students writing with transitions?
Yeah, if we go back to the outline that I mentioned earlier, on that outline when I was talking about the structure of a paragraph, it shows students that if they're going to talk about one quote, one piece of evidence, and transition to the next one, just a transition, because they should use a transition. And often students will say, I know what I want to say, I know what I want to say next, but I don't know how to get there. And that's when they need to put the transition in, because they're trying to make the connection from one point to the next, and that's what these phrases help them do.
It seems like you're teaching them how each sentence functions. So if the function of this sentence is to elaborate, then you use an elaboration transition. If the function of this quote is to provide an example, you would use a for example. So it seems like you're really teaching them about the structure of writing.
Yeah. And to go along with just the discussion of where you use transitions, I once again, just by going to the internet and searching for it, I was able to find some great resources on transition words that really show you, okay, if you're going to continue a line of reasoning. If this quote is on the same topic and you're just giving another example, then you could use one of these. If you're going to contrast, if you're going to change the line of reasoning. So this gave them the different functions of their quotes. If this is what your quote is for, then you can use this transition. So this proved really helpful. And another exercise we used to kind of solidify this in class, I gave them some paragraphs that did not have transitions. I put it up on the board, we read over it, and then I said, okay, where would you put transitions? And we talked about where they needed to go. And you know, at the beginning and at the end, students knew they needed a transition, but I was actually really pleased because a lot of students got in the middle of the paragraph, of the example paragraph, it switches from sort of one idea to another, and they realized they needed to put a transition there. So they're able to recognize it. When you give them a paragraph with no transitions, they look at it and they realize, okay, this is not good. This is not good writing. There's something wrong. I can fix it. So that kind of helps teach them, all right, transitions are important.
And that's the same concept where you isolated a key skill that you determined was important, and maybe you saw it was lacking or you expected it to be lacking, and you said, before we go into writing this big essay, I'm going to front load this specific writing skill so that they can apply it to their big essay.
Yeah, and this handout actually was really successful with the students. I also teach creative writing, and I had some extras lying around, and a couple of students saw it and said, oh, can I have these? Which was kind of interesting. Students were asking me for handouts. And then actually the other day in my classroom, a student came to me after school for help with a college essay, and when she got all of her information out and her rough draft and she wanted to talk to me about it, she also pulled out this worksheet.
Right.
And I realized that as she was writing her college application essay, she was taking these transition words I'd given for the Grendel essay and was using it to help her in that situation as well.
So they know what good writing looks like, and they see a good tool. So I think that's a good sign if they're going back to it sort of independently, and it tells they know, okay, I need this. So that's probably a good sign about this. Some of these sheets you gave them. Something else I noticed, we posted a list of words. And these are what we would call academic vocabulary words, which are words that are not domain-specific to language arts or science, but also not just conversational English. And these are a lot of the words that students need in order to be able to read more complex text. And your students actually used quite a lot of them in their writing. Was there any strategy or scaffolding you provided to help them incorporate those words in their writing?
Well, I think I noticed that some of those words were these transition words, so that helps sort of raise the level of discourse in their paper. But additionally, one thing we talked about just as we were going through, beginning to write the essay, we talked about using specific language. And I always like to brainstorm and say, okay, what are some words that you should really never use in a high school essay? And we'll get words on the board like stupid and things like that, just words they know are not appropriate, and then we're like, okay, well then what's a more academic, what's a more sophisticated way to say this? So we do some brainstorming that way. And then on my rubric, I always include a few points, like 10 points for specific vocabulary, just to kind of remind them that as they're revising their paper, they need to look back through and think about, okay, should I use a better, more specific word here?
And you also mentioned oral language and discussion, and providing certain discussion questions, and using that to help students build language. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, as far as teaching the novel Grendel, the way I did that was to do in-class discussions. I made the students read the chapters on their own at home with discussion questions for focus, and then we'd come in the classroom and we would discuss the answers, and I would make them use evidence. But I tried to write those discussion questions in a way that it was using more academic vocabulary so that the students would come in the room and they would discuss using those words.
So you put the words in your questions.
Yes.
So they had lots of exposure to them.
Yes.
And then you would use them in class as well.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much.